Mara Kellen wiped grease from her hands and stepped back from the cargo shuttle she had been repairing. The station's air was heavy with ozone and the metallic smell of welding sparks. Asteroid K-93 hung like a gray pebble in the void, its surface scarred by decades of mining. Ships shuttled in and out, their hulls groaning under the strain of rusted joints and makeshift repairs. This was no fancy core station. It was a place where humans and aliens alike struggled to survive against the emptiness of space, the cold metal and the constant threat of malfunction. Mara thrived here. She had to. Her partner perched on a shelf, wings folded neatly but shimmering in the weak light. Nomi, her small dragon, tilted his head, eyes reflecting every flicker of sparks around him. He was only the size of a large cat, but Mara knew the truth. He was clever, unusually strong and far smarter than any alien pet she had ever seen. She had rescued him from a smuggler years ago, and since then he had become more than a companion. He was her warning system, her helper, her secret edge in a station that judged humans as weak, disposable, and slow. The comm panel screeched, a high-pitched alarm that set Mara's heart racing. A warning tone followed, a distress signal. She grabbed the microphone. "Kellen here. State emergency." The automated voice repeated the signal. Mara frowned. It was a diplomatic shuttle carrying alien leaders. One of the most important trade missions in the sector. And it was spiraling out of control. Mara's stomach tightened. If the shuttle crashed, it would not only kill the aliens aboard but ruin any hope of future trade for the outer colonies. The blame would fall on whoever was nearest. On her. "Come on, Nomi," she whispered, slinging the little dragon onto her shoulder. He chirped softly, curling his tail around her neck. It was more than a gesture of trust. Mara felt it like courage itself, a tiny heartbeat of reassurance against the terror ahead. She ran to her shuttle, a battered craft patched with years of ingenuity. Its hull had scratches and dents that told a story of repairs and survival. Mara climbed into the cockpit, feeling the controls under her fingers like old friends. Nomi crouched beside her, wings twitching slightly, tail brushing her arm. The ship shuddered as she powered the thrusters. The alarm continued, shrill and urgent, warning of ion storms forming around the shuttle. The moment she exited the station hangar, the storm hit. Lightning-like arcs of energy danced across the void. Mara's shuttle shivered, systems warning that shields were under stress. "Steady," she muttered to herself. She had no choice. Someone had to guide that shuttle to safety. Every other pilot had refused, citing the risk of total failure. Mara's fingers flew over controls, checking trajectories, calculating speed and distance, mentally adjusting for every unpredictable shift in the storm. Nomi let out a tiny roar, a high-pitched sound that felt almost like a cheer. Mara laughed nervously. "You think we can do it, huh?" The little dragon nudged her cheek, and she felt a strange surge of calm determination. He had a knack for sensing danger, an instinct that went beyond human or alien comprehension. The shuttle spun ahead, caught in the ion currents. Mara's vision blurred from the flickers of light. She glimpsed the diplomats through her viewport, creatures of all shapes and sizes, some trembling, others struggling to communicate in panic. Every second mattered. One misstep, one miscalculation and they would be lost. Mara's stomach knotted, but she didn't hesitate. She had faced impossible repairs before, held failing engines together with little more than hope and skill. This, she realized, was no different. Only higher stakes. A massive ion bolt arced across the storm, slicing through the void. Mara's shuttle shook violently. Sparks flew across the control panel. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, tilting the ship just enough to avoid a direct hit. Nomi's scales glimmered under the erratic lights, his tiny claws gripping her jacket as if lending her strength. The shuttle sheaved and groaned, metal complaining, but it held. Mara's mind worked faster than ever. The distress signal showed the shuttle rotating out of control, tumbling like a leaf in a violent wind. There was no way to reach it with automated drones, they would be destroyed instantly. She could either wait and hope the shuttle stabilized, or risk everything and fly close enough to make contact. Her chest tightened. Risking her own life against an alien storm? Absolutely. Risking Nomi's life? She swallowed hard but nodded at the little dragon, who flared a tiny burst of fire in agreement. The shuttle loomed ahead, spinning faster, its emergency lights flashing like a heartbeat in the void. Mara's fingers danced across the controls, calculating speed, trajectory, distance, all in a heartbeat. She could almost feel the storm trying to push her away, trying to tell her to turn back. She ignored it. Humans were not made to flee when others needed them. Humans were made to act, to survive, to protect. As she closed in, her shuttle jolted violently again. Nomi squeaked in surprise but stayed firm. The diplomats screamed, tiny alien voices cut by panic. Mara clenched her jaw. The ion arcs were getting closer, hitting dangerously near. She adjusted the thrusters, felt the ship tilt unnaturally, but somehow, impossibly, she managed to lock onto the shuttle's hull with a tether. Sparks flew across her viewport, alarms screamed, and the void around them seemed to crackle with fury. Her heart pounded and she looked down at Nomi. "Ready for the impossible?" she whispered. The dragon's eyes glimmered with intelligence and courage. Then, with a final surge, Mara pulled her shuttle forward, just enough to secure the first connection. The storm roared around them, the diplomats tossed like ragdolls in zero gravity, and Mara knew that this was only the beginning. One tether secured was nothing. The shuttle still spun, the storm still raged, and the real test, the one that would prove human courage against impossible odds, was about to begin. The first tether rattled in Mara's hands like a live wire. Sparks danced along the shuttle's hull, and the ion storm screamed around them, turning the void into a blur of light and danger. Every warning alarm in her cockpit screamed simultaneously. Her fingers flew over the controls, adjusting thrusters and stabilizers, trying to hold the shuttle steady against forces that wanted to tear them apart. Nomi pressed himself closer, tiny claws digging into her jacket, tail flicking with nervous energy. His scales reflected the storm, flashing blues and golds, as if he too was a warning beacon in the chaos. Mara swallowed hard. She could feel the trembling of the diplomats through the viewport. The aliens were terrified, unable to grasp what was happening, their survival now entirely in human hands. The shuttle lurched violently. One of the tethers snapped, slamming Mara's chest into the console. Alarms shrieked, lights flickered, and the void itself seemed to mock her. Mara took a deep breath, her pulse hammering. This was no longer just a rescue. It was survival, raw and brutal. Every calculation had to be perfect. One wrong move, one hesitation, and everyone would die. She tightened her grip, firing the secondary thrusters in a careful, controlled burst. The shuttle responded, groaning but holding. Nomi chirped, tiny sparks flaring from his nostrils, almost like encouragement. Mara's heart surged. They weren't just fighting the storm, they were fighting despair, doubt, and the notion that humans were weak. "Hang on," she muttered, teeth gritted. "We're not done yet." She leaned forward, eyes scanning the shuttle. The diplomats were still spinning, their limbs flailing in zero gravity, helpless. The ion arcs were closing in, some so close that Mara could see the molten metal sizzling on their hull. She knew drones or automated systems would never survive this. No one else could reach them. Only she could. Her mind raced. There had to be a way to stabilize them temporarily, just enough to attach the second tether. She remembered a trick from the old docking manuals, a counterspin maneuver, using the shuttle's mass against the storm. It was risky, and if she miscalculated, it could tear both ships apart. But there was no choice. Mara slammed her palm against the control panel, twisting the shuttle just as Nomi hissed, wings flaring instinctively. The shuttle responded, spinning slightly, and she lunged forward to latch the second tether. Sparks flew as metal met metal, and for a moment she thought it wouldn't hold. Then a loud clink signaled success. Mara exhaled sharply, but relief was fleeting. The storm was still relentless, and the shuttle was spinning faster than before. She could see pieces of debris and ice fragments torn from the asteroid slamming past them. Every second was another test, another chance for disaster. The diplomats were now screaming in unison, their voices overlapping into a strange chorus of fear and pleading. Mara looked at them briefly. They had never expected this. Their eyes, wide with terror, were now filled with disbelief. They were witnessing a human not only survive the impossible but take control of it. Humans were unpredictable, reckless, and brilliant when cornered. She felt a fierce pride tempered with fear. One wrong calculation could cost lives. Nomi chirped again, louder this time, almost like a command. Mara's mind clicked. Maybe the little dragon's resonance, his tiny humming vibration, could help dampen the shuttle's oscillation. It was untested, unproven, and utterly dangerous. But she had no other option. She moved him to the console, letting him press against the critical wiring, his tiny body vibrating in sync with the emergency stabilizers. Sparks shot across the panels and alarms screamed louder than before. Then, impossibly, it worked. The shuttle's spinning slowed, just enough for Mara to breathe and assess the next step. She could almost see the aliens' minds catching up to what had happened. Their fear was giving way to awe. Even the youngest ambassador, barely taller than a human child, had stopped screaming and clung to the side of the shuttle, staring at her in disbelief. The storm had not relented. Another arc of ion energy surged toward them, bigger, hotter, closer than before. Mara's shuttle buckled under the force. She screamed against the roar, adjusting thrusters, using every ounce of her skill to keep both crafts intact. Nomi's wings flared, adding a tiny lift, a spark of improbable help. Mara's chest burned from exertion, sweat stinging her eyes, but she refused to give in. Humans did not surrender to storms. Humans made impossible choices, fought impossible odds, and survived where others faltered. Her eyes caught movement on the shuttle's hull. A panel had come loose. If it tore completely, it could destabilize the ship entirely. Mara's mind raced. She could weld it in place, but the storm made every movement dangerous. Time was running out. The diplomats were now frozen, clinging to whatever they could, their eyes wide. She had to act. "Hold still, little one," she whispered to Nomi, who chirped and pressed closer. Mara activated a magnetic stabilizer on the shuttle's hull, then used a tether line to secure the loose panel. Sparks and static danced across the metal, but the panel held. She exhaled slowly. One crisis survived. Another still loomed. Mara looked out at the storm, at the endless black dotted with arcs of blue and white lightning. Her shuttle creaked under the strain. The diplomat's shuttle spun ahead, still unstable, still at risk of being ripped apart. But for the first time Mara felt a sliver of control. She had bought them a few precious seconds, but the worst was still ahead. She glanced at Nomi. The little dragon's eyes glimmered with intelligence, courage, and an unspoken warning. The storm was not finished. And neither was the rescue. Mara tightened her grip on the controls, heart pounding, mind racing. One wrong move now and everything would be lost. The void stretched ahead, a chaos of energy and metal. Mara took a deep breath. She had survived storms before, fixed ships others had abandoned, defied odds that made others tremble. But this was different. The lives of the alien diplomats, the fragile peace of the sector, everything depended on her next move. And she wasn't about to fail. The shuttle shuddered violently, a blast of ion energy slamming across its hull. Mara gritted her teeth and tightened her grip on the controls. Her knuckles were white, sweat stinging her eyes, but she refused to look away. The diplomat's shuttle was still spinning wildly, a helpless toy in the storm. The automated drones had long since been destroyed by the arcs. No one else could save them. Only she could. Nomi clung to her shoulder, wings vibrating slightly, eyes fixed on the unstable shuttle. Mara had begun to notice a pattern in his behavior. The little dragon's vibrations seemed to resonate with the shuttle's hull, countering some of the storm's destructive oscillations. It was untested, unproven, and utterly strange, but in this chaos, strange was all she had. "Okay, little one," she muttered. "Let's try this together." She adjusted the thrusters, nudging her shuttle closer, and felt the metal groan as the tethers strained. Nomi chirped sharply and pressed his tiny body against the console. Sparks danced across the panels and alarms screamed, but the shuttle began to stabilize minutely, enough for her to attempt a risky approach. The diplomat's shuttle was spinning faster again, and Mara had only seconds to act. If she miscalculated, it could tear apart entirely, sending debris and lives hurtling into the void. She calculated trajectories, drift speeds, and the timing of ion arcs in her head, every decision critical. Mara's mind felt razor-sharp, honed by years of repairing ships under impossible conditions. Humans thrived where others faltered, improvising, adapting, surviving. Another massive surge hit. Mara's shuttle jolted, systems screaming in protest. She gritted her teeth and pushed the thrusters to the limit. Nomi squeaked but held firm, tiny sparks igniting along his scales, illuminating the cockpit in bursts of gold and blue. Mara felt a spark of hope. They were making progress. The shuttle's spin slowed enough for her to get close to a stabilizing panel. She grabbed her welding torch and a tether line, preparing for the most dangerous maneuver yet. She would have to exit the safety of her shuttle and attach the tether directly to the spinning diplomatic craft. One slip, one miscalculation, and she'd be torn into space. Her chest tightened, but she refused to back down. Humans were not designed to flee from impossible odds. They met them head-on. "Here goes everything," she whispered. Nomi chirped, wings flaring in what felt like encouragement. She engaged the external thrusters and shot toward the shuttle, tether line in hand. The void around her was a chaos of light and metal. Every spark of ion energy could melt her suit instantly. She dodged, twisted, and lunged, feeling the pull of gravity and the storm's energy tugging at her body. With a practiced flick, she latched the tether to a stabilizing panel. Sparks flew as metal met metal, the ship groaning in protest, but the tether held. Mara let out a short breath, adrenaline surging. One panel secured, one small victory, but it was only temporary. The storm wasn't finished. As she floated back toward her shuttle, another ion surge struck the diplomatic craft, spinning it violently again. Mara's stomach dropped. If the tethers held, they might survive. If not, she refused to even think it. She recalibrated her thrusters, fighting the storm's pull with every ounce of strength and ingenuity she had. Nomi flared his tiny wings, landing on her console and adding another flicker of balance, almost as if he understood the physics she could not. The diplomat's eyes were wide, staring at her through the viewport. Their fear had shifted into awe, but it was fragile. One mistake and that awe would turn to horror. Mara felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her chest, but she didn't flinch. This was what humans did. Where others failed, they adapted. Where others froze, they acted. Another challenge came fast. One of the shuttle's thrusters began failing, sparks shooting into the void. Mara's heart leapt. If it went out completely, she would lose control entirely. She activated the auxiliary thrusters and recalculated trajectories on the fly. Nomi chirped again, tiny scales glowing, wings vibrating. The resonance, she realized, was helping counteract the storm's unpredictable pulls. She leaned closer, adjusting the energy flow from the console, letting the little dragon's instincts guide her. The shuttle's spin slowed slightly. Mara gritted her teeth, sweat pouring down her face. "Just a little more," she whispered. The diplomats were still screaming, voices overlapping in fear, but their eyes were starting to track her movements. Oh! She felt the first fragile thread of hope in the storm. A massive ion bolt struck near her, jolting the shuttle violently. Mara's suit alarm screamed, sparks danced across the viewport. She gritted her teeth and adjusted her approach, moving with calculated precision, every second a gamble. Nomi chirped, almost as if scolding her for hesitating. She nodded to him, understanding. Hesitation would get them killed. Finally, she managed to secure a second tether, connecting her shuttle to the diplomat's craft in 2 points. The shuttle shuddered violently but began to stabilize. Mara exhaled sharply, adrenaline still surging. They were not out of danger, but they were closer than ever to surviving. The storm still raged, the shuttle still groaned, and Mara's body ached from the strain. But for the first time, she saw a flicker of calm in the diplomat's eyes. They realized a human had risked everything, relied on skill, courage, and ingenuity, and survived. Even the youngest ambassador's trembling hands clutched the viewport frame as though replaced fear. Mara looked at Nomi. His eyes glimmered, small but fierce, his tail curling around her shoulder. "We're not done," she said softly. He chirped in agreement, wings flaring, sparks flying. The storm had been slowed, but only slightly. The worst was still ahead. She gritted her teeth, adjusting the thrusters again. The void around them was chaos incarnate, but Mara Kellen was a human. She did not back down. She would not fail. Lives depended on her courage, her mind, and the tiny dragon at her side. The diplomat's shuttle still spun violently, the storm still raged, and Mara's next move would decide everything. The storm had no mercy. Ion arcs sliced the void like lightning swords, the diplomat's shuttle spinning wildly, almost like a leaf in a cosmic hurricane. Mara's fingers ached from holding the controls steady, her body straining against the shuttle's thrusters. Sweat stung her eyes, and the hum of failing systems screamed at her. Every second brought the possibility of disaster. Nomi flared his tiny wings, hovering on her shoulder, scales glittering with reflected sparks. His small body vibrated with energy, as if sensing where the storm's force was strongest. Mara had begun to rely on those vibrations, a strange but undeniable pattern. He instinctively compensated for the shuttle's instability, and it was keeping them alive. Humans had tools, intelligence, and courage, but sometimes, extraordinary allies made the difference between survival and death. The diplomat's shuttle pitched violently, a massive ion surge hitting its hull. Mara's chest tightened as she calculated the next move. The tethers were holding barely, but she couldn't just stabilize it. She had to get them clear of the storm. A simple rescue wouldn't work. She needed ingenuity, and she needed it now. Her mind raced. The station's abandoned gravity module, old, unstable, considered useless for decades. It could generate a localized gravity well, strong enough to anchor the shuttle at least temporarily. She had installed one in her workshop months ago for testing. If she could activate it mid-flight, she might be able to slow the diplomat's shuttle long enough to guide it to safety. It was risky. The module had never been tested in open space. A misfire could rip both ships apart. But there was no other option. Ready for a gamble? Mara whispered, pressing her palm to Nomi's glowing scales. He chirped, tiny sparks flaring along his back. The dragon flapped his wings once, a silent cheer, a pact. Together they were the last line between the storm and complete disaster. Mara flipped the module's switches, heart hammering. The shuttle shuddered as the gravity well activated, a strange, pulsing field surrounding the diplomat's craft. It tugged at the spinning hull, slowing its rotation just enough. Sparks flew across her console. Warning alarms screamed. She gritted her teeth and adjusted the thrusters, nudging the shuttle into position. Nomi chirped again, vibrating with the pulse of the gravity field, amplifying its stabilizing effect. The diplomat's shuttle steadied slightly, enough that Mara could reach for the final tether attachment. She leaned forward, gripping the magnetic clasp and lunged toward the hull. The void around her seemed to twist, a storm of energy, metal, and noise. Her suit alarm screamed. One wrong move could send her tumbling into the black nothingness. She focused, calculating the angle, the pull, the storm's rhythm, and with a click, the tether latched. Sparks erupted, but the connection held. Mara exhaled sharply, adrenaline surging. The shuttle groaned under the strain, but she felt a tiny victory. Nomi chirped, letting out a long, high-pitched sound that echoed through the cockpit. Mara smiled faintly. Together they had bought precious seconds, but the storm was not finished. The ion arcs intensified, huge bolts arcing directly toward them. Mara's shuttle shuddered violently. Systems flickered, alarms blaring warnings she could barely comprehend. The diplomat's shuttle pitched again dangerously. Mara's mind raced. She couldn't simply pull them out with tethers alone. They would spin apart under the storm's force. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. She remembered the docking thrusters she had jury-rigged months ago. Small, auxiliary boosters intended for emergency maneuvering. They weren't designed for this, but perhaps in combination with the gravity module and Nomi's vibrations, it might work. She activated the boosters, timing their bursts with the pulsing gravity field. Nomi flared his wings, tail flicking, scales sparking as the two forces combined. Slowly, miraculously, the diplomat's shuttle's spin began to slow. Mara's pulse raced. It was working, but she could not underestimate the storm. Another massive ion surge hit them, the hull groaning in protest. Mara slammed her hand down on the main thrusters, pushing them to the limit. Nomi chirped, wings flaring wildly, glowing brighter than before. The little dragon's vibrations now resonated through the shuttle's hull, a stabilizing rhythm Mara had come to trust. The diplomats, clinging to walls and rails, had stopped screaming. Their wide eyes followed every move, a mixture of fear, awe, and disbelief. A human, frail and small by alien standards, had done what no automated system could. No alien pilot dared enter the storm, but Mara had. She had risked everything, relying on skill, courage, and ingenuity. And a tiny dragon. With one final push, Mara adjusted the tethers, nudged the boosters, and stabilized the shuttle enough to begin guiding it back toward the station hangar. The storm still raged around them, but they had control. For the first time, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. She looked down at Nomi. His tiny chest rose and fell, eyes bright, scales sparkling. He chirped softly, nuzzling her cheek. She laughed despite herself, heart racing. "We're not done yet," she whispered. The storm was still dangerous, but together they had turned the tide. The diplomat's shuttle followed Mara like a tethered star, wobbling but intact. The station's hangar was in sight, an open mouth in the dark void, waiting. Mara adjusted her course, calculating the final approach, every second a delicate balance of skill, courage, and nerve. The storm was relentless, but they were human. And humans, Mara thought, never back down. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew the worst challenge was yet to come. But for now, one impossible rescue had become possible. The void stretched ahead, alive with danger. Mara's shuttle creaked, sparks flying, but she gripped the controls tighter. One final move, one final test of human determination, and they might just survive. And she would not let anyone, not the storm, not the odds, not even fate itself, stop her. Mara's shuttle shuddered violently as she guided the diplomat's ship toward the hangar. The ion storm still raged like a living thing, arcs of energy flashing dangerously close. Every warning alarm screamed in unison, and the void seemed to twist around her. She gritted her teeth and ignored the pain in her arms and shoulders. The moment of truth had arrived. Nomi perched on her console, wings quivering, eyes glowing like twin stars. The little dragon had become more than a companion. He was an active part of this rescue, a partner in her courage. Mara felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her chest. Every diplomat aboard that shuttle was alive because of her decisions, her skill, her determination. Every misstep could shatter that. She refused to let it happen. "Steady," she muttered under her breath. Her fingers danced over the controls, adjusting thrusters and delicate pulses, nudging the spinning shuttle with the precision of a surgeon. Nomi chirped and vibrated, tiny wings flaring, and Mara realized again how much his instincts complemented hers. It was as if the little dragon could sense the storm in ways her human mind could not, helping to counteract forces that no human technology could manage alone. The station's hangar loomed ahead, a dark frame against the chaos of the storm. Mara's heart hammered. The docking sequence would be the hardest part. Even with the tethers and the gravity module, one wrong move, one extra gust of ion energy, and the shuttle could spin out of control, smashing into the hangar walls or floating endlessly into the void. "Almost there," she whispered. Nomi chirped back, scales flashing as if affirming her plan. Mara aligned the shuttle, calculating distances, timing the thrusters with the pulsing arcs. She could see the diplomats' faces through the viewport. Wide eyes, trembling hands, silent awe. Fear had been replaced with hope, but only because of her courage and ingenuity. The first contact with the hangar was brutal. The shuttle jolted violently as magnetic clamps latched onto the docking rails. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and Mara's body slammed into the console. Pain radiated through her shoulders, but she ignored it. Humans did not yield to pain. They did not quit when others feared to act. They adapted, they fought, they survived. Nomi let out a high-pitched chirp and flared his wings, sending a small cascade of sparks across the console. Mara smiled faintly. "Yeah, little one. We're almost done." With a few final adjustments, she stabilized the diplomat's shuttle, guiding it fully into the hangar bay. The tethers were detached carefully and magnetic locks engaged. The ship quivered, then settled, whole and intact. The hangar lights reflected off the diplomat's wide, astonished eyes. Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the low hum of the gravity module winding down. Then the youngest ambassador stepped forward, tentacles trembling. "Human, you saved us," it said in a voice that shook with disbelief. Another diplomat, wings folded tightly against its back, bowed deeply. Mara could feel their gratitude in every gesture. They had expected failure. They had expected death. Instead, they had witnessed courage. Mara exhaled, letting herself relax for the first time since the storm had hit. Her body ached, bruises forming, sweat dripping down her face, but a sense of triumph filled her chest. She glanced at Nomi. The little dragon chirped, wings twitching, eyes bright with excitement. Together they had turned the impossible into reality. News of the rescue spread quickly. Alien delegates reported the daring act, emphasizing the human pilot who had risked everything. Mara Station, once ignored or dismissed as a backwater repair dock, became a hub of respect and admiration. Trade agreements that had seemed impossible now moved forward smoothly, thanks to her courage. And somewhere in the background, the story of a small dragon who had flown through an ion storm alongside a human mechanic became legend. Mara walked through the hangar afterward, feeling the fatigue in her limbs. She saw the diplomats heading to safety, their voices low but filled with awe. One of them, the oldest ambassador, approached. "Your species, humans. You are remarkable," it said, shaking its head. Mara smiled faintly, shrugging. "We try. We survive. We adapt." Nomi nuzzled her cheek, tail curling around her arm. She laughed softly. "We both survived, little one. We both made it through." She realized something profound. Humans were often underestimated, seen as fragile or reckless. But when faced with impossible odds, they shone. Their courage, intelligence, and morality could not be measured in technology alone. It was a fire inside them, small but unyielding, that refused to be extinguished. For the first time since the storm began, Mara looked out at the void beyond the hangar doors. Stars shimmered, distant and cold, but they no longer seemed threatening. She had faced the storm, saved lives, and emerged not just alive but victorious. Humanity had proven its worth once more, not through might or size but through ingenuity, courage, and the willingness to act when others could not. Later, in the quiet of her workshop, Mara cleaned her tools, the adrenaline fading. Nomi curled up in a sunbeam, eyes half closed, wings twitching occasionally. She smiled, feeling the warmth of accomplishment. They had faced impossible odds and they had survived. together. Somewhere out there, the diplomats would speak of the human and the dragon who had defied death. Other colonies would whisper of the mechanic who had flown into a storm where machines failed. And Mara, small and unassuming in a station on a forgotten asteroid, understood the truth. Courage was contagious and humans were unstoppable when they refused to yield. The stars had witnessed human heroism and it had left a mark. Mara looked at Nomi, eyes meeting his, and whispered, "We did it, little one. We really did it." Nomi chirped, wings flicking in approval. Humanity had triumphed. And in the quiet aftermath, Mara knew one thing clearly: there would always be storms, always be danger. But humans would rise to meet them against impossible odds with courage, skill, and heart.